Hi, welcome to another episode of Sonic Discovery. I am your host, David Correa, and on this episode we'll be talking about new music from Porches, First Aid Kit, and SiR. Hey guys, thanks so much for clicking on the video. Before we get into the reviews for the episode, I do want to go a bit into what the premise of the show is. I am a music fanatic, and I make music part of my daily life. I hope that's the same for you. And at least when I was younger, I found that, I really just stuck to what I liked. I didn't like to venture out and try new things, and I think it really hurt me because there's a lot of great music that I missed out on, and I don't want to do that anymore. So part of the show is to not just listen to the stuff that I like, but also listen to some of the stuff that I may not necessarily be into, in hopes that maybe some of this is going to catch your guys' attention and, potentially you'll find something that you can really fall in love with. The first album up for review is the newest one from Porches. This is called The House. Now Porches, you can kind of think of them as a band, but they're primarily a solo project of Aaron Maine. This is their third album, and this one is being released through Domino Records. And if you're not familiar with Porches, it's usually, kind of get more of a synth-pop sound, very melancholy. The vocals on here are very gloomy, and usually they're drenched in auto-tune. Their last album, Pull, had a lot of really great songs. It was a big surprise when I listened to it. I didn't know anything about Porches, and it was one that I frequently came back to. And you kind of have a similar vibe going on this album. The big difference, though, is that there are more tracks, and they're shorter tracks, too, which kind of act like interludes, which I felt kind of hurt the overall vibe of the album in general. First, we're going to start off with my personal favorites. The opening track, Leave the House, is a mellower song with a simple synth line and a simple beat. On here, we have Alex G providing some background vocals, which have a nice little echo effect to Aaron's lead. On this one, he's mostly talking about wanting to have someone come into his life, but he's not really sure what he really wants them to do when they're there. Find Me was one of the singles released from the album, and this one has a much more up-tempo vibe. It reminded me a lot of some of the catchier songs off of their last project. I especially like this one when those horns come in on the chorus. And despite the peppier sound of the music, this one is talking about being okay with just wallowing in your loneliness. Now the Water provides us with a sunnier sound and a nice beat. And this one is just about finding peace being in the water. By My Side is a much mellower song and has a slower beat, as he's talking about having to check himself from saying dumb stuff so he can really keep that person by his side. Anymore is a really catchy song with a great beat and synth pattern. This one gave me much more of a new wave vibe and reminded me of tracks by Tears for Fears, which is always a plus in my mind. Goodbye opens up slowly with the synths, and gradually, they start building up, and then halfway through, we have that beat finally come in. And when it does, it's probably going to have your head bobbing like this a few times. W Longing has a mid-tempo beat, clear synths, and a twisting sax solo that closes out the song nicely. Here he talks about wanting to be with somebody and really needed them to be clear as to what they want from him in return. And Ono is a guitar-driven track that has a nice beat that settles in on the chorus. Here he talks about a love that didn't quite work out. There are other songs on here that I did enjoy, I just didn't think were quite as strong. This one includes the opening single, Country, which is a fairly short synth-led track in which he just talks about enjoying the little special moments in life. Anything You Want is the closing track in which we just have his vocal and synths. On here he's expressing that he'll do anything he wants to make his love happy. I did mention earlier that some of these tracks are really short and they're basically just interludes. And although not all of them worked, some of them sure did. Like this next one, Understanding, which is a synth-led track in which he's basically just talking about how awesome it is to love someone fully. Karen was another one that really worked for me. This one has a fluid synth line and a real thumping beat. I'd love to tell you what this one's about, but it's in a different language. Sorry. Wobble and Swimmer were two that just, they weren't really working sonically for me. So those are the ones that you may want to skip on the album. Overall, like I mentioned, not as strong as Pull because some of these interludes really got in the way. But still, great synth-pop album. In my mind, this deserves a 7 out of 10. So worth checking out. That was my take on the newest project from Porches. This is The House. Next up for review, we have the 4th album from First Aid Kit. This is Ruins. First Aid Kit is a sister duo from a small town outside of Stockholm, Sweden. They primarily have more of a folk sound, but sometimes incorporating some rock, pop, and country, as they do on this project. This is their 2nd album being released through Columbia Records. I wasn't too familiar with their last projects the whole way through, but I was happy with the singles that I heard off of them. The same thing can be said from this album. It has very strong singles and opens up very strongly with the opening track, Rebel Heart. This is personally one of my favorites. It opens up very simple, and then it really starts going when the drums come in on the 2nd verse. I love the shift that the song takes 3/4 of the way through. It goes into a completely new direction with a galloping beat and nice horns that are added in. Here they're talking about love loss, which is the general theme you'll find throughout every song on this album. It's a Shame is the opening single from the album, and this has more of a folk rock sound with really great harmonies coming in on the chorus. Fireworks was the 2nd single release, and this has more of a melancholy vibe to the song. And lyrically, they're talking about not really setting up too high of an expectation, because when you don't get there, you're just bound to be let down. To Live a Life opens up as a simple acoustic song, but then really blossoms into something really beautiful, especially on the last verse. Hem of Her Dress is another folk song with really strong harmonies behind it. This one is about finding out that your love's moved on to someone new, and instead of being bitter, really just reflecting on those good memories you guys shared together. I love the ending of this track because it sounds like they brought a huge group of friends in and they're all just kind of having this big sing-along, and then they introduce trumpets, and in my mind, you can never go wrong when you start incorporating horns into a song. And the closing track, Nothing Has to Be True, which is a little different because instead of providing us with the nice harmonies on this track, they each take a verse separately. So it's really the first time that we're hearing them singing solo. It's a good thing that this is the closing track because musically, it sounds like it's the closer. It starts off pretty bare, but then it starts flourishing towards the end with drums and slide guitar and strings and the whole kitchen sink. This one talks about yourself and who you are now and who you were before, and do you really like the person that you're turning into? There were other songs that I didn't think were as strong, but definitely still worth a mention. Postcard is one of the more country-leaning tracks on the album. This one has some nice flashes of piano solos and some steel guitar there. Lyrically, this one talks about having someone go their separate way and just coming to terms with the fact that they have to be set free. Distant Star was another one that was more of a country-leaning track, but it can get a little trippy here on the bridge. The song can really be a bummer too, because it's talking about holding on to those special moments because they're eventually gonna fade away. And then that brings us to the title track, Ruins, which is another fairly simple folk song. And really what caught my attention on this one is the way they drag out the words ruin, which is the hook, and how they just kind of drag them out, and just, how their vocals sound on that track. I really enjoyed that. To close things out, there wasn't really a bad song on this album. There were songs that were much stronger than the other ones, but even the simple ones, I like those. I like the simplicity of some of these tracks. This is going to get a score of a 7.5 out of 10 from me, so definitely worth a listen. And to close out this episode, we have the debut album from SiR. This is November. Now SiR, his real name is Sir Daryl Ferris, and he is from here, from LA. He's from Inglewood. He's a singer-songwriter, producer, and he was just recently signed to Top Dog Entertainment. So now he's in there with Kendrick and Schoolboy and SZA and that whole crew. We actually heard a little bit of his vocal on different albums by J-Rock and Isaiah Rashad. So he's kind of been around that whole group since 2015. On this album, we primarily get R&B with little dashes of soul and hip-hop thrown in. Also, what's cool about this album is that there is kind of like this little narrative going on the whole way through. It's like he's on a spaceship, and I'm not really sure where he's heading to, but he has conversations with the ship all throughout the album, like on the opening track, Gone, which is just kind of setting things up, but it does have some nice soulful music on the background. First, going into some of my favorite tracks, Something Foreign, which features vocals from Schoolboy Q, has great piano over the production. On here, he's talking about not really being a follower and setting his own path, and there's a nice smoothness to it. Even Schoolboy, on his verse, there's a nice smoothness to his vocal, which is rare because he usually has much more of a growlier voice. The Evils has a more chilled out vibe, as he's talking about his love of smoking out. To him, life is better when you're going in slow motion. I was especially fond of the hook on here, in which we have a pitched up vocal saying, "One spliff a day will keep the evils away." Something New features vocals from Etta Bond, and this has a nice smooth sound. I really dig the horns on here. It really gave the song much more of a jazzier vibe. I love the chorus on here, which repeats the line, "If everything else falls apart, I still have you." And this is one of the tracks that continues that narrative in which he's talking to his ship. Better gives us more of a spacey R&B vibe, but this one also has some jazzy stuff going on underneath. On here, he's reflecting on a girl in which he didn't really respect, and now she's getting love from someone that's treating her much better. This one also kind of continues that narrative that we have between him and his ship. The last two tracks on here were two of my personal favorites. Dreaming of Me gives us more of a spacey vibe with keys, this cool guitar line that happens all the way throughout, and a bunch of different added vocals that provide a nice effect on the song. And then the album closes with the soulful track Summer in November, which equates the person's love to being as great as it would be to have summer in November. Well, maybe not here, because right now it's winter and it's still pretty damn hot. On this track particularly, he gave me more of an Anderson .Paak vibe. There were other songs on here that weren't as good as the other ones, but still worth mentioning. The opening track, That's Alright, gives us a nice R&B sound. The production on here almost sounded kind of like they're banging on cookware to me. Never Home is a mellow track that focuses on the neglect that he has for one of the girls back home. You can hear her complaining about this neglect throughout the song through different voicemails that we hear. War is a soft R&B sound with spacey keys and some horns. On here, he's talking about being ready to fall in love with this girl and not stopping until she is his. The one track on here that I would probably skip is I Know. I did enjoy it, although it has more of an aggressive sound to it, which didn't really fit with the other tracks on this album. I normally would like it, but on here, it just kind of messed with the vibe. Overall though, I was pretty happy with this project, and also happy with the runtime. This thing's only about 33 minutes long, so really easy to listen to. Like I said, has a nice R&B sound, sometimes incorporating some soul, and also has little dashes here of hip-hop influences. This is going to get a score of a 7 out of 10 from me. Well, there we have it. 3 albums that were around the 7 mark for me. Nothing that was too great, but 3 albums worth checking out. Well guys, thanks so much for checking out the episode. If you have any thoughts on my reviews, make sure to share those at the bottom. Also, if you like what you're watching, go ahead and click the like button, or you could always subscribe. On the next one, you're going to get reviews on the newest from Migos, Holly Cook, and Van Wilder.